So I started my career in the early days of the internet, and I got into IoT because this feels very, very similar to those early internet days where there's lots of innovation going on in hardware and software, but nothing speaks to each other. So I was super excited this week to see the work that OGC does to solve these problems so the industry can live up to its potential and promise that we all expect will come out of it. It can't happen without standards. So without further ado, I'm going to start our speakers off. Our first speaker today is Ed Parsons. Ed is a geospatial technologist with Google UK and responsible for evangelizing Google's geospatial products. Please welcome Ed to the stage.
Thank you so much. It's going to take me a few seconds to get my slides up. Okay, thank you. So obviously I come at IoT from a slightly different perspective to probably most of the talks you're going to hear for the rest of the summit. I mean, I represent, a company that is interested in the mass market, in consumer applications of the Internet of Things. So I'll cover that perspective and some musings that come from looking at the world from that end of the telescope. But I'll also talk about where I think there is a really important role for a geospatial perspective on the IoT. And I think IoT and geospatial are in many ways one and the same. And I think that's where it's so important for us in this environment to look and understand what developments in the IoT potentially could mean in terms of new products and services and ways of moving forward. A little bit about me, as you heard, I work for Google. I've worked for Google for the last 12 years. Before that, I worked for the National Mapping Agency in Great Britain, the Ordnance Survey. So although I come from a consumer background, I'm very much grounded in traditional enterprise.
Not sharing.
I'm not sharing.
Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, you're sharing, but you're not sharing. Here we are.
There you go.
Now I'm sharing. Okay, enough about me. So here's the hype curve. We're all familiar with this. Gartner make loads of money by flogging this to people. Is there anyone from Gartner here in the audience? Okay, I can be rude about Gartner. They make a lot of money flogging this to people. Every year they come up with a new version of the emerging technologies hype curve. This is from 2015. I'm not sure if you can see particularly clearly in the slide. At the very top of the peak of inflated expectations in 2015 was the Internet of Things. So that's a bad position to be in because it's only downhill from that point. But eventually you hope you'll get to the slope of enlightenment and you'll end up being something that is going to mainstream for people. You would hope. Well, has anyone seen the Gartner curve for this year? No. All right, let's have a look, see if we can find it. Here it is. Some of the terminology has changed. Actually, quite a lot of it has changed. Funnily enough, the IoT has completely disappeared. Not there anymore. I don't know what that means. Does it mean that actually, hey, it's clearly mainstream, or actually is it maybe just something that Gartner aren't interested in selling as an idea to people? The point of bringing the hype curve up is I think we have to recognize that IoT is one of those very much hyped terms. It's something that people talk about an awful lot. Often they may not well be talking about the same thing. And I think because of the amount of hype that has been with the term, sometimes a little bit of negativity around the idea. But I would argue that the IoT is here today. It's something that actually is part of our day-to-day lives, whether we notice it or understand it. It is, and it's something that is really concrete. People are making money from it. People are producing products and services that are changing people's lives. The IoT is here, regardless of that hype. And actually, the IoT has been here for some time. It's not, perhaps as Gartner saw it, as a radically new emerging technology. It is something that has been part of the internet from the very early days of the internet. Here's where most people think the IoT started. This is Carnegie Mellon University. Back in 1982, their computer science department, as all good computer science departments should do, connected their Coke machine to the internet. It had a couple of micro switches in that would sense the temperature of the Coke machine, and when the Coke machine ran out of Coke, it would send an email via SMTP and all of those sophisticated internet technologies to the rest of the computer science department, say no point going to the Coke machine, it's run out of Coke. But that's 1982. That's pretty much the very early days of the internet. We've always been connecting devices to the internet since the very beginning. And we've been doing that, making use of whatever technologies, whatever protocols, whatever software is available at the time to make that work. And there's a common thread that runs all the way through this. Part of it is about sensing, part of it is about actuation, about turning things that we do in the cyber world to things that are physical. But it's also fundamentally about making information useful and accessible to people so they can do things. In this case, it could save me from getting up from my cubicle and going to find a Coke, only to find that the Coke machine was empty. So although it was, yes, a bit of a laugh and a bit of a superficial example, actually, it is something that is useful. I prefer the term ubiquitous computing. This is something that goes back to the Palo Alto Research Center and the seminal paper that Mark Wisner delivered in 1991, which introduced this idea of ubiquitous computing. The idea here being that actually computers cease to be things that you sit in front of that have keyboards and monitors, that the computing environment becomes the world around us. And we interact with devices as we live our day-to-day lives. And the interface becomes invisible. The computers disappear. And I prefer this as a term. I think this is actually much more useful and in many ways more profound, because actually I think it represents the world as it is today. It's the world like this. This is a photo I took in Auckland earlier on this year in New Zealand. And Auckland is one of those cities that has been completely overtaken by electric scooters. Now, you might argue this is a good or a bad thing. Certainly, it makes traveling around Auckland, which if you've never visited is quite a hilly city, on electric scooters, it makes it quite exciting. Whether it'll have a huge impact on the urban mobility of the city, I'm not so sure. But this is an example of ubiquitous computing. This is an example of the Internet of Things. Here we have these devices that are connected to the internet, that are location aware, that are things that you can interact with on a standard day-by-day basis. It's not seen as particularly radical. And what I like about this as an example of an IoT type of application is actually it represents a sort of more sophisticated architecture, because actually what's actually connecting to the internet are not the electric scooters, but the mobile phone that you use to interact with those scooters. It's the mobile phone that contains most of the processing power. It contains the GPS receiver, the knowledge of your location. There's a lower bandwidth data connection to the scooter to connect the two together. And I quite like that architecture of different devices providing different functionalities. The phone, the mobile device, I argue, is perhaps the most important element in any IoT future, because this is the device, this is the thing that is going to be most of the things of IoT. because it's something that is just also widely used and something that is quite personal to us. Certainly in consumer applications, that's really important. Okay, so if you like, that paints a picture of where I see the IoT being today from that sort of consumer perspective. I just want to now post some thoughts, some musings that are very much personal to me. They don't represent Google's particular point of view in this. So as a result, I would like you to accept this terms of service for the rest of my presentation. So the views expressed from now on are entirely my own. There should be no way attributed to anyone else as opinion or organization. So if we can all click on the agree there conceptually, I will carry on. See, I work with more lawyers these days than anybody else. Okay, it's the internet, as we've heard, and I think this is really important. The Internet of Things is just the internet. And what does that mean? Well, from one point of view, it means that it is going to grow a bit like the internet has grown. This is a great high-level architecture, one perspective of the architecture of the internet. And you can see it's multi-layers, you can see it's hierarchical. Most importantly, you can see that, and if you've got any knowledge of the history of the internet, you'll know that that developed in an organic, non-planned, almost chaotic process. There was never a great architecture defined that the internet was going to be. It grew organically. New services were implemented to solve particular tasks, built upon existing services that were already there, and identifying different layers of activity that were needed. You know, the very basic packet protocol level, in terms of internet connectivity, in terms of mail, and in terms of applications that sit on the very top. So there was no blueprint, there was no grand plan, there was no architecture agreed up front. It grew organically. And I think the same thing is going to happen with IoT applications and processes, or ubiquitous computing. It will grow organically. Things will pop up that solve particular problems. They will sit at various levels in the hierarchy to solve particular tasks. And fundamentally, at least in the early days, where we are perhaps now, it will be messy. It will be really messy, and some things won't work very well, just as the way that the internet grew. And how many of us can remember, there's a few people in the audience are old enough, how many of us can remember first connecting to the internet using the SLIP protocol or using PPP? Horrible things. But we have to go through those to get to where we are today. We'll have those same growing pains in IoT applications. Here's another thought: platforms versus the basket of remotes. This is a quote that comes from Jean-Louis Glacé, who was one of the VPs of Apple in the mid-1990s. And what he identifies is this problem, that in this kind of messy environment of the consumer IoT, consumer ubiquitous computing at the moment, we end up with the basket of remotes. We end up with different services, different mechanisms for controlling all the different devices that we might have at home or that we may have as consumer level IoT devices. Each device has its own software stack, it might have its own way of communicating, and it's messy. He used at the time this idea of, oh, it would be like having a basket of remotes. The reality is it's more like this. These are the applications that I have on my phone to control the devices I have at home. I have probably about 60 different devices at home that connect to my local Wi-Fi that provide IoT-like applications. So Hue light bulbs, Wemo and TP-Link switches, a Yale lock, Nest cameras, Google Assistant devices. Each of them has their own application to control them. Some of them use the same protocol to talk to each other, others don't, others use completely different protocols. It's messy. If you want to get in the consumer IoT now, you have to be an early adopter. You have to be willing to spend most of your day explaining to your wife why the lights came on in the middle of the night because the IFTT connection that you had to the weather forecast broke. That's sounding like speaking from personal experience there. Okay, so how do we get around this? How do we get around the problem of the basket of remotes? Well, we do that, at least for the moment, by building platforms. Now, there's an argument that actually, another architectural approach is to go much more for a federated, more diverse software architecture, software stack, but it's not where we're at the moment. So at the moment, we build software platforms. So this is the Google Nest Hub I have at home, and it controls all of those various devices I have by providing behind the scenes a software platform that means that those different devices can communicate to each other via a centralized service. And it means I can use a voice interface to control all those devices in my home, and I can create different planned interactions depending upon environmental conditions. So, for example, when the smoke detectors that I have in the home pick up smoke or potential smoke, alarms will go off and all my lights turn red to indicate that the alarm has gone off. It's connecting those different devices together using a common platform. Now that common platform in the case of Google is part of the Google Cloud platform. It tries to build or remove much of that complexity in terms of individual device management by having different libraries that talk to over those different devices. But then what I think is really useful for the conversation that we're going to have probably for the rest of the day, and more importantly for OGC longer term, a look at those key protocol bridges that we build, both MQTT for that message-based delivery of information, and HTTP when we're talking about protocols. So if you were here at the OAB meeting earlier on, that was a key part of the discussion we were having. There were these two ways of interacting, one about activating or changing the status of a device or a service, another one in terms of monitoring what is going on and having a publish subscribe view. That's deeply embedded into the architecture of consumer IoT already. And using those open interfaces, MQTT, HTTP, allow third parties to build applications that can make use of these software platforms that get these different devices to talk to each other. So my point here is, yes, it is messy at the moment, and it will probably be messy for a while until we end up with perhaps more standards or different protocols for doing this. But it means that we can start to build solutions today already. A different thought, perhaps, different idea, and this is to do with human-machine interaction in terms of consumer IoT. How do we interact with these devices? Well, obviously, there's a big focus on the moment in terms of voice interfaces, having your home hub or your Amazon Alexa, or having HomeKit applications on your iPhone connecting via Siri, so you can talk and switch the lights on in your home. Great. But actually, I think there's a probably deeper level of human-computer interaction that we need to think about. Let me give you an example. Here is my Nest thermostat, another classic IoT device. I have this at home, and I could pull out my phone now, and I could change the temperature at home from here in Calgary. Well, that's great. I could also program my thermostat, as you might do traditionally, to say, well, I want my thermostat to come on in the evening, and I want it to then switch off at about midnight when I go to bed, and that's great. I can also do that. Where I think the big change is going to come is when we actually start to use that information that is my interaction with the device to get the device to start to think in more intelligent terms. When I apply AI to the problem, when I get the device to look at how I choose to heat my home. What temperature do I actually set it to when I turn up to it and I twiddle the knob? And actually, what time do I usually actually switch the heating on? And how does that change over time? And how does that change relative to the ambient conditions outside my home? And that we're beginning to see happen, where The interactions that we have with the IoT devices we have in our homes actually become inputs to machine learning algorithms that start to automate the process. So the devices automate some of those functions. So now I don't fiddle with my Nest thermostat anymore. It automatically changes the temperature in my house based on the preferences I've demonstrated over the last 6 months or so in relation to the ambient temperature outside my home, and actually also related to my location, because it won't turn the heating on if I'm not home. Security clearly is going to be an issue for IoT devices. Particularly it's become an issue for the devices we have in our homes, because most of the devices we have in our homes, because they just look like a piece of consumer electronics that we plug in and we don't interact with, we don't believe that there are security issues, but there are. This is a Huawei Wi-Fi router that many people have had in their homes. There were tens of thousands of these installed here in Canada and in Europe. They ran a simplified Linux operating system to control them, to allow user interaction and firmware upgrades. It had security holes. It could be taken over by malware, a particular example called Mirai back in 2016, allowed these routers to then create distributed denial of service attacks on other websites around the internet. And obviously the users of these routers have no knowledge that this was going on, that their devices that maybe sat in the corner of their home by the telephone have been taken over by foreign powers and were attacking websites. That's a key concern. It's something that we still need to think about and address. These devices, when we connect them to the internet, will always be potential proxies for malware attacks. And obviously privacy. What does it mean to have a speaker in your home that is supposedly listening to you all the time, or a camera on your front door that is connected to the internet and could be recording activities that are going on outside? Just in the last 2 weeks, there have been examples in the press in the UK of concerns about, in this case, the Amazon Echo, but also obviously the Google Home Hub and even Apple Siri, in terms of, well, how much of the information that these devices are recording as sound are actually being listened to by humans for quality control and software development purposes. And in the UK, some police forces are trying to get local neighborhoods to connect their smart doorbells together to create CCTV networks to monitor criminal activity in the neighborhood. Now, you can argue that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's something that we probably need to have discussions around because that's certainly a capability that's present. But really what I wanted to concentrate on, because I'm a geographer and we're geographers and I think this is important, is this: everything is somewhere. And what's the relevance of the where to the IoT devices or the ubiquitous computing that we carry around with us? I'm not talking about, creating the town of Internet things in this case, more the fact that we are today part of this ubiquitous computing environment where we're carrying devices that are connected to the internet, and those devices are sensing and monitoring our progress on a day-to-day basis and creating information products as a result of that. And key here is that we are talking both in terms of space and time. This relates back to those kind of protocol choices that we need to make. Not only are we in a particular location, we're in a particular time, and both those things and the variability of those things are important. I like to term this ambient location, the ability to always know where we are and for the devices that we interact with to know where they are. It's about that blue dot, that blue dot that you have in Google Maps that represents your location. A lot of technology goes on behind the scenes to create that blue dot. And on itself, it's quite useful to you, particularly when related to other contextual information like a map. But actually, there's a real power when we start to combine those blue dots together. If that's me, and then I know that there's somewhere else in my locality, that's immediately much more useful than just my location in isolation. If I can then identify actually where everyone else who are using their mobile phones are, I don't want to know who these people are, but just the fact that these devices are there. And if I can actually identify what those devices are doing in terms of how they are moving, that becomes a really powerful information resource. And of course, there's a network effect here. Rob Metcalfe, one of the founders of the internet, came up with this network law. The value of a network grows with the square of the size of it. And we're dealing with very big networks here of billions of devices moving around the world every day. It allows us to do this. This is the up-to-date traffic information here in Banff. And you know there are no sensors in the roads in Banff. There are no CCTV cameras monitoring traffic. This is information that's coming from people's mobile phones being anonymously contributed as they sit in their cars and they move around. And I can, find any particular street anywhere in the world and get the same information because there are enough mobile phones moving around to provide us with that sort of information globally. At a more localized level, this is my local pub in Teddington. Big fan of this. It's a nice little pub. It's one of those pubs that are where you buy, a burger and chips, and rather than it coming on a plate, it comes on a piece of slate that's come off the roof. I don't know quite why that's a big thing at the moment, but yeah, it's one of those sorts of pubs, and that's great. And I like it because most of the time it's quite quiet. But sometimes they have big screens that come down and they'll show a rugby game or a football game and it gets noisy and I don't like it so much. Well, what I can do in Google Maps is I can look at the information for the Teddington Arms. I can scroll up and it will show me how busy the pub is at this particular point in time. Again, based on that information coming from mobile phones. It tells me how busy it is compared to how it is normally for this particular time of day. That's really useful information to me. Same sort of principle here in Sydney, working with government in New South Wales. We can estimate how busy a particular bus is going to be, again, based on the historic information linked to people traveling on those buses, contributing information from their mobile phones. So you could say, well, actually, the next bus is coming. It's only going to be 2 minutes, but it's full, but there's another bus behind that that's going to be empty. I'll wait the extra minute for that bus. That sort of information is really actionable. And here we are talking about all these various devices talking to each other. This is the Internet of Things. It's not perhaps Internet of Things that you normally think of, but it is these devices talking to each other. Increasingly buses are having automatic passenger information added to them, so they are aware and they're contributing this information for these sorts of products and services. And this actually makes a real difference. There's a great statistic that Carl Watkins did in an academic research. There's a 2-minute perceived drop in wait times for public transport when you make information available. So there's actually no difference in terms of when the bus is going to come, but people perceive that the bus system is working better when you just provide the information to them. And if you want people to use more public transport, if you want to change people's behavior, here's an example where actually making information available to them actually has that impact. A final thought, and this is just, I suppose an excuse for me to show what I think is quite a cool video. But my final thought is that whatever we do in this space, in terms of connecting these devices together, in terms of building information products, be it for mass market applications like the one that I've mentioned, or the applications that are more perhaps industry focused that you might hear later on today. Whatever we do, it must be about people fundamentally. It must be about making a change that is positive to people. And I think we can do that. Now, the video I'm going to show you is about Project Wing, which is an activity that we are experimenting with in Australia at the moment, using drones to deliver things. But I don't want you to focus so much on the technology. It's really cool, clearly, and it's like airplanes and IoT, so I love that. look at the impact that it has on this lovely lady.
My first delivery was coffee and muffin. There are little messages that the staff are putting on the boxes, just personalising it for us, and they don't even know us. It's really nice. Yeah. I ran out here waiting for it. When it actually comes over to house and delivers, it's still something to run out and watch. When Chemist's Warehouse came on board, I didn't realise how handy it would be. I had my grandchildren here and they're very fair. It turned out to be quite a hot day. Looked at my sunscreen, it was out of date. Ordered sunscreen for them, 7 minutes and it was here. And my husband, it's really handy. I order one of the bowls from GYG. There's his Mexican meal, gluten-free, fully delivered. That's the convenience.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Ed. We have time for a few questions. Does anyone have any questions?
Good, I'll be able to get on my email then.
Well, I'm gonna ask a question. So my question is, other than home delivery, what's next for Google at the cross section of IoT and geospatial?
Yeah, I think a lot of it is focused on these consumer applications. This, the drone delivery is kind of a bit out there sort of application. It's much more about automating the home, making the home more efficient, connecting those devices that we have at home. We've done the analysis, just connecting things like those thermostats to your mobile device, making your home heating or air conditioning more intelligent by connecting it as a ubiquitous computing device will save your energy bills between 10 and 15%. If you could do that for every home, that's a big step in terms of reducing carbon emissions. So it's kind of those little small steps in and around what we do, making kind of incremental, relatively small changes to our day-to-day lives through the IoT that where our focus is.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so Ed, I really enjoyed that, but I was getting distracted because there was this large elephant that was sort of walking down the back of the room. So it's great that you talked about it's the people, and I think a lot of what you were talking about was there's a bargain in there that says, provide this information about my life, anonymous or not, and I get benefits back. And I think the question that's coming up increasingly is, when and where do we get to make the bargain? And is that perhaps a part of IoT going forward?
I think that's a really, really good question. And I think it relates to that sort of point that the IoT is just the internet, but perhaps, coming on a little bit later on. And we're only just beginning to address those issues with the internet today. It's become something that we're more aware of now when we use web services, be it Google or Facebook or Apple. We are making a bargain, be it explicit or implicit, in terms of making data available. Those same bargains will have to be made in IoT devices and in the ubiquitous computing world as well. And the key point is in terms of educating and in terms of making that a clear choice that people are making. Because most people are quite willing to make that choice as long as it's informed. Where people get upset is when that choice is taken away, or they perceive that that choice has been taken away.
Thank you, Ed. Once again, a very inspiring presentation. I have a very selfish, I guess, question from an OGC perspective, which is, you said something or everything is somewhere. So in the IoT world, do you see that they actually know about what the OGC community is doing with respect to SensorThings? Do we need to do more to let the world know that we have, standards and best practices that they can use and not reinvent the wheel?
Yes, I think without question, there isn't a huge amount of awareness of, from a consumer point of view, no awareness really of SensorThings, OGC, probably. And I think the reason for that is probably the where bit in the IoT still isn't high enough up people's thought processes yet, but I think that will come. And I think that the challenge that we have in OGC is making what we do relevant to that very diverse ecosystem that are building these devices and applications. You know, it's almost always people that aren't in this room that are building these services, and they probably will never be in this room. But we need to make sure that what we do is visible and accessible to them, even though they may not be part of the process. And particularly when it comes to managing the spatial part of the IoT. You know, there's an argument, well, how much of it is actually special? In most of these cases, the where is an attribute to the thing. And you know, so you end up with a WGS84 coordinate with the correct epoch attached to it, you're good to go. But I think we need, fundamentally, I think it needs to be about addressing where geography becomes relevant to people, saying, hey, well, actually, because it's geography, you need to talk to these OGC guys. And it's a case of, you know, positioning OGC in that space for these communities that have got no awareness of OGC.
Any other questions? Okay, let's have a big round of applause for Ed. Thank you very much. So next on our agenda is Dr. Reid Farber. I'd like to welcome Dr. Reid Farber to the stage, please. Dr. Farber is a professor at the University of Calgary and founder of the Running Injury Clinic. He's a leading expert in biomechanics research using wearable technologies. Welcome.
Thank you.
Figure out. Sorry, here.
No,
it's all good stuff.
Is that me?
So yeah.
We might need to share again.
All right.
Yeah, let's minimize that. Sorry.
How do I move that thing?
There we go. It's not shared. Sorry.
Oh, that's okay.
It's not shared, but now it's shared.
Perfect.
Thanks very much. Thanks for the kind invitation to come and speak. And unbeknownst to me, this might actually mesh relatively well with Ed's talk to a certain degree. I'm just a simple biomechanist. I analyze the way people walk and run. I try to figure out why they're injured. And kind of my academic career took a bit of a turn in 2008. So I founded this clinic, the Running Injury Clinic, and a patient came up to me, or I was treating a patient, and I asked them, what are they doing that week? And they said, well, I was going to go for a run today, but I left my Nike chip at home. And I said, oh, what's a Nike chip? And they described it to me, and I was blown away. My job as an academic is to change behavior. I try to do research, we try to disseminate that information, and I try to, I'll tell you why I work with runners here in a little bit, like they're crazy to work with. But it was fascinating to me that a simple device, as inaccurate as it was able to change somebody's behavior, because I didn't want them to run that day. And that was the result of all this. So I kind of refocused all my research towards using wearable sensors and how can I analyze people outside the laboratory. And what I do know is that we need to kind of merge technologies together to provide insight to these individuals. I don't know what happened there. There, okay. I have no conflicts of interest, to declare. So I'm going to talk a little bit about wearable sensors and what I work with for the most part. I'm going to talk about how wearable sensors are just beginning to, what will really reshape healthcare in the very near future. And we're doing some very interesting work in that regard, both in my laboratory and others across campus. And then we'll talk about IoT and wearables a little bit at the end. So wearable technology is becoming very ubiquitous, to borrow a phrase from Ed. There's a compound annual growth rate of 35%. This should be around a $100 billion business. In some places have already, or some publications have already said that we're beyond that 100 billion. We're not going to be there by 2024. It will be well beyond that. There should be about 1 billion connected devices within a few short years from now, and that lends for a lot of excitement. So wearable technology can measure many, many things. Most of these, I guess I have a little bit of a reputation. I was quoted in Runner's World magazine saying that smart technology is relatively stupid right now. And I firmly believe that. I will stand by that. I think that these are more obvious metrics. I don't think they provide useful information for individuals. And again, I'm always going to try to bring this back to healthcare and dealing with more of our pressing issues in terms of musculoskeletal diseases, chronic diseases like cancer, diabetes, osteoarthritis especially, but I'm going to kind of couch it with runners quite a bit. You know, somebody knows how far they went. They either went far or they didn't. They achieved their goal. Runners really track their mileage for the most part. Runners know if they went for a hard run or not. I don't need to tell them what their heart rate is for them to know that, okay, I'm fatigued. Like I feel like I burned a lot of calories. Any caloric expenditure is so horribly wrong on any device. I've never seen a validated caloric expenditure algorithm for any device, and we've kind of looked at a lot of these. But there are some hidden pieces in here that I think are important. And it's important because people get rid of they stop using their device within 6 months. And within 1.5 years, people have moved on to a totally different device, usually switching from, say, Fitbit to Garmin to something less well-known. So these devices are not captivating people's attention, I think, for a couple reasons. It's not providing them any insight whatsoever, and it's providing them inaccurate information. I think people catch on to that really, really quickly. And they're isolated to themselves. Certainly there are many devices that have geospatial capabilities along with heart rate, along with other biomechanical measures, but they haven't really put that information together for the most part. So they tell us what you're doing, they tell you what you've done, but they certainly do not tell you what to do. And that's critical from a healthcare perspective because you're dealing with a patient, one patient at a time, and they know how they are at this point in time when you're seeing them. They know how they've been, and they're there to find out, okay, what do I do next? So trying to merge machine learning, AI, layers of different wearable devices and technologies to help an individual make that decision on their own, that's really what's coming around right now, and that's how healthcare is going to be reshaped in the future. And I'll just kind of tell you how we go about it. So we're trying, this is my quote, I can say that. I think wearable technology needs to reside within the hidden spaces of our lives. I'm extremely excited about wearable devices that tell you what your blood pressure is. That is not something that's immediately available to you unless you have a sphygmomanometer, which is the little cuff and the stethoscope, and you can listen to it. And there's automated machines. You can go to Shoppers Drug Mart or Walmart and buy these automated machines. Still, you can go to the grocery store, sit down in a little chair, and stick your arm in the cuff. But that procedure is still a procedure. It means that you have to sit down and do it. Whereas there are emerging technologies where there's an algorithm, it'll take your heart rate, it'll try to figure out what you're doing, tells you what your blood pressure is. There are devices that tell you what your heart pressure is, which is critical for cardiac care. So that's what I mean by sitting in the hidden spaces of our lives. I'm trying to work on predicting injury before it happens. Not just for runners, we're starting with runners because they're a very engaged audience for the most part, but we're trying to apply it to individuals in early stages of diabetes who have been newly diagnosed with osteoarthritis in order to monitor disease progression and hopefully prevent amputations with respect to people with diabetes and or total joint replacements for people with osteoarthritis, or at least delay it and optimize when they're getting it done. So these are this is the readout from a Garmin device that runners commonly use. It's called a running dynamics pod, and it's a validated little biomechanical device. It's got a inertial measurement unit, so it's a gyroscope, an accelerometer, magnetometer in there, and it tells you what your stride length is, like how long your stride is when you're running along. It tells you how many steps per minute you take. It tells you what your vertical ratio is, so how much you bounce up and down on your left leg compared to your right, and how long your foot is on the ground for, ground contact time. And these metrics are interesting, but they are nothing that I would ever use from a research perspective. It's nothing I would use to try to understand, is somebody on the verge of an injury or not? But these are valid metrics that they just kind of throw up out of this device. They just throw it at people. This is one person's run, and I don't know what to do with this information. I'm a bit of a plodder myself. I don't run, I plod. If I can't hold a conversation, I'm running too fast. And personally, I don't really care what my cadence is. I just want to go for a run. But I want to know if I'm about to be injured. I think that's really valuable information. That's what we're trying to figure out. Now, I know that 88% of runners use some type of wearable technology. There's been large-scale surveys done. We've conducted one of these. About 62% of them primarily use it to avoid injury. So from an academic perspective, I am personally, maybe I won't take it personally, but we are failing the running community. Half of runners get injured every year. If you want to start up a business, focus it on runners. It's a reoccurring revenue stream. I'll tell you that right now. Oh, they just keep on running, and they're insane, and they don't admit that they're injured till they can no longer run. It's fantastic. But reoccurring and chronic running injuries leads to osteoarthritis. Osteoarthritis is absolutely going to crush our healthcare system by 2035. It is now in the billions of dollars, and we will have a very disabled community to deal with unless we can do something. So we're trying to tackle it with respect to just monitoring the way people move, trying to prevent injuries and progression of disease in the first place. Well, what we found out really quickly is that I cannot just rely on an IMU to do this job for me. So being a very naive, I guess highly trained, super specific biomechanist, our first study out in the real world, we were having people, we applied machine learning techniques to data, and we try to kind of figure out how are people moving. And one of our first experiments was, I just wanted to see the impact of somebody running on a sidewalk versus running on grass. This is not rocket science. I'm not changing the world here, but I really wanted to understand how is somebody interacting with their environment. And what we started to notice in our data, so literally people would go for a 2-kilometer run. They start at the Olympic Oval, the University of Calgary. They'd run down the sidewalk. They'd turn left. They'd run down towards a children's hospital, turn around, come back. That's about 2 kilometers. Then they take a step to the left, and they do the same run on the grass. That's all. Then we developed an algorithm we trained a machine learning algorithm to figure out how they move on the grass, how they move on the sidewalk, and then we feed in new data, and with about 100% accuracy, I can tell if somebody's running on grass or a sidewalk. Kind of cool. From a geospatial perspective, it's not quite as sensitive to discern is somebody half a meter to the left or not. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. But when we started looking at the data, there were individuals that had huge spikes in acceleration, medial to lateral. So think about that. Somebody's running straight ahead, and they're bouncing up and down while they run, and they should move a little bit back and forth and a little bit front to back, and people move about 7 centimeters up and down when they run. All of a sudden, there's people who have these massive spikes of acceleration. So we thought our devices were malfunctioning. And when we really started to look at the data, what we noticed is that this was happening when we collected data at noon or over the noon hour. It wasn't happening at 9 o'clock in the morning. It wasn't really happening at 3 in the afternoon. And then we for sure were not collecting the data at 4 because we've got a run club and our varsity runners out there. So it's happening at noon. And what are other people doing at noon in an environment? What do you think? I've got people running up and down the sidewalk, and there's lots of other people out for a walk. We're a very active community at the University of Calgary. So our runners are having to avoid other pedestrians. They're jumping off the curb, running around someone. Hey, see the light go on in Steve's head right there. That was awesome. Then they jump back on the curb. So our first reaction was, well, we should just clip that data out. I'm like, no, we can't do that. This is how people interact with their environment. You know, we need to understand that. Then, this is a couple of years ago, we got snow. We got a huge dump of snow on October 4th. What the heck? So we had to abandon our data collection. And we were just collecting one run for each individual. It was a one-time data collection. But understanding that now the snow had fallen, we have to hold everything until the spring. We just started thinking about, well, what are these other factors? We have to consider the weather. People run just a little differently depending on ambient temperature. We have to consider surfaces. There's a section where our algorithm breaks down. Is there a section that has now been redone, but the roots from these beautiful aspen trees were starting to come up and they were crumbling the sidewalk. So there's a very rugged section of the sidewalk, if you will, and people run differently in that section. And certainly people run differently on sidewalk or grass. They run differently on gravel as well, with lots of algorithms to figure this stuff out. It's, I don't think I need to tell a runner that they're running on the grass or running on the sidewalk. They know that. But I'm going to get to my point here of why this is important to layer these technologies together. And then you have to know if there's other runners or pedestrians in the world. You have to know where the other blue dots are as well. Now this is important because if I take just two variables, how much somebody bounces up and down or vertical oscillation, and how much their pelvis drops side to side. When they're on one leg, their pelvis drops a little bit. When they switch to the other leg, their pelvis drops a little bit. So this is one run. This is every step for a 2-kilometer run. And then we just draw a little circle around it, and we capture the 95%. We capture the 95% confidence interval, or where does 95% of the data fit in? Then what's interesting is we ask this person to go for the exact same run 2 days later, and they behave remarkably different. I don't know why. The weather's the same, the route's the same, the time is the same, the shoes are the same, but mechanically they're behaving very different than they were 2 days ago. So we undertook a bit of an experiment to figure out, well, how many days does it take? How many days worth of data do I need in order to capture an individual's specific profile? And the answer is I need about 4 to 5 days worth of data. So here's 5 days worth of data all in black that encompasses the black and the red from the panel on the left. And then now we can collect any run we want about the same temperature, about the same elevation, same shoes, etc. So about the same type of external factors. And we will capture about 90% of their data will fall inside of that. So in order for me to make a decision about a runner or anybody, even just walking around, I need 4 to 5 days worth of data. Now this is important because we piloted at the acute care ward at Foothills Hospital at Calgary, because the physicians, in addition to vital signs, one of the criteria for a physician to discharge somebody from the acute care ward is whether they can walk around the ward twice. And you wouldn't know this, but patients lie a lot. So they can't lie about their blood pressure or their heart rate or how they're feeling or their chem panel if they do a blood draw or their urinalysis. But if the doctor says, hey, did you walk around the ward twice today? More times than not, they're going to say, yeah, I totally did. And the doctor's going to say, well, your vitals are looking pretty good. We're going to release you. And 80% of those patients are readmitted within 2 weeks. Why? Because they get home and they can't go to the bathroom. They can't get out of their chair and walk properly or ambulate with safety to the washroom. And they certainly can't maybe get out of bed. So we're just trying to figure out, is somebody able to walk around? I just want step count. That was our first job in figuring this out. Then I need some more data from these individuals. So I would need, for a patient walking very slowly, I need about 2 days worth of data from them. And if I have that information, I can compare it to how they're walking at home. What is their mechanical behavior? And this is important information for a physician from a monitoring perspective, because that's a big, Ed got into a little bit, home health care is a really big thing in terms of, can we monitor these patients at home? So we have to know a lot of external factors. We have to layer many different apps and information on in order to make a judgment about a patient or try to predict injury. So we have to know what temperature it is. We have to know whether they're running uphill, downhill, or level ground. You change the way that you walk or run if you're going uphill or downhill. We have to know where the person is in the world in order to make that judgment. If you are familiar with the route, you're probably going to run very similar to how you usually run or walk or ambulate. And if it's new to you, you're going to slow down and you're going to change your mechanical behavior. You're going to walk slower, or you might walk faster because you're in a hurry for some reason. So we have to take velocity. And we have to know what type of surface you're walking on as well. So we have to layer a lot of information into our algorithm to figure out, okay, what's going on with this one person. So We've published a lot on this. Publishing a study that using wearable sensors to classify gait patterns due to changes in environmental weather conditions. We are not changing academia by any stretch of the imagination here, but we're just trying to add a little validity behind us in terms of layering on different pieces of information to make an evidence-informed decision. We also have to understand subgroups. We have to understand something about the patient in terms of male versus female. We are built differently from one another, and women do walk and run slightly different than men, or men walk differently than women. They're just different. Older versus younger, there's differences in mechanics, and whether somebody is a competitive runner or a new runner or recreational runner, there's differences in those patterns as well. So let me kind of put this into an example. I like to call this the check engine light. So hopefully we're familiar with this. You're driving in your car and your check engine light comes on, and the first thing you do is ignore it. Just like every runner ignores knee pain until they can no longer run. That's my typical patient that I see. And you will ignore it until it irritates or aggravates you enough, or maybe your car breaks down, and you need to go to a mechanic who's got diagnostic equipment to figure out what's going on. So I don't want wearable technology to tell someone that, hey, your pelvic drop is a little bit more than usual, or your vertical oscillation is different. I am just trying to figure out how do I turn an app on to warn someone that their check engine light has come on, and thus to go see a medical professional. Because I know that wearable tech companies don't want anything to do with healthcare if they are liable for the information being presented to the patient. So I'm trying to remove that risk, that liability, and I'm trying to place it in the hands of a physical therapist, a physician, chiropractor, whomever, I don't care. I'm just trying to turn a check engine light on. So we determine what a typical pattern is. We collect about 4 or 5 days worth of data. We determine what community they belong to, male, female, competitive, recreational. Then we start comparing new bits of data to this algorithm that we've developed, and we try to provide some insight. We try to turn the light on. So here's 37 women that we collected over a 5-month period of time. Every dot is the average of some variable, some biomechanical. It's a mishmash of weather, topography, biomechanical data all mashed together. And we kind of sorted it out using what's called a principal component analysis. So we just tried to align things so that we can deal with variance. We can apply a machine learning hyperplane to this, which you see is that squiggly line. We're just trying to separate out experienced females in blue, those who have run marathons in the past, from brand new runners. These are brand new runners. They've never run before, and they're training over an 8-month period of time to run a marathon. And sure, people run differently. This is not rocket science, but I want to establish communities. Now, I just want to talk about, it's all about people. I want to talk about one person. This is her. She's an experienced female runner, and this is her typical pattern. So there's 5 of her dots inside that little space. I can create this border around it using a single class support vector machine. And there's also other people's dots in there as well, because every now and then 2 people might run very similar to one another in terms of a mechanical pattern. So this person, this is their green zone. This is how they typically behave. Now, one Sunday, we noticed that they behaved very differently. They're still running like an experienced female runner, but they are outside of their zone. Everything was fine. They didn't have any, and we called her on Tuesday after we had run the data through. Like, does anything happen? Was anything like really different on Sunday? She's like, no, it was a good run. Had a good run. I'm like, okay, that sounds great. The following Sunday long run, she had to stop 5 kilometers in because she started to experience knee pain. So I am not here to tell you that I can figure out whether somebody is injured or not. She knows that she got injured, and they started behaving really differently. In fact, this person started running more like a recreational runner than her subgroup. So she changed families altogether. I would have liked the opportunity to address this a week prior to say, you know what, you're behaving very differently today. You might want to go get this checked out. You might want to think about your training pattern. You might want to think about, have things really changed? And I can reverse this. let's apply this now, this same concept to a patient post-surgical. Somebody gets a total knee replacement, they are automatically in the red zone. But I know that this is a 65-year-old man. I know how 65-year-old men usually walk, and that's my green zone. So this person automatically starts in a red zone, and I want to track their rehabilitative progress. So I can track them and set boundary as to, have they crossed that hyperplane? Are they now in a yellow zone? That's great for the person to know. Have they moved fully into the green zone? I don't even know, I don't even need baseline data from this individual. I just want them to walk like other 65-year-old men. That's all. So the concept can kind of go both ways. We can warn people that they're doing something differently, and we can encourage people that their rehabilitation is going in the right direction. We've developed algorithms to take a patient at baseline who has arthritis, and I can tell you what stream of rehabilitation is best for them. This stream of rehabilitation, they'll have no success with. I can actually tell you if they need rehab or not, because sometimes they walk just fine. We call them non-responders, but they're actually very happy patients because we can show them data to show that you walk in a very typical fashion. So where wearables and IoT are going to come in is getting a blood draw urinalysis is a snapshot in time. It's very static in nature. So we're working also towards activity as a vital sign. How can we blend these pieces of information together in terms of better understanding a patient? One example that I really like, nutrition affects all of us. So this was developed at a Tufts University. And there are precursors to this without a doubt, but this is just a nice little microchip. It's got a layer of fabric on it that can determine how much salt, glucose, and alcohol you've consumed. So it's just a really nice example of trying to take a piece of technology, merge it with IoT, or merge it through an IoT process, add in other measures such as how you move in the world, and try to get a more holistic picture from this individual. Ward of the 21st Century is one example here at the University of Calgary that's looking at in-home care. So on this person, like this is what I do. This is my little piece right there. I look at somebody's motion, but we want to sensorize the cane. We want to look at heart rate and respiratory rate. We want to know where they are in the world. We want to blend all that information together to inform their healthcare team, whether it be their physician, an ambulance, and or a clinician in terms of what is this person doing? Do they need help at home? So I'm really pleased. I'm leading this relatively large initiative that Steve is part of. It's called the Wearable Technology Research and Collaboration Training Program, or WeTrack. We have funding over 6 years to train 80 to 100 graduate students to make them the next generation of experts in wearable technology. We're 2 years in, almost 2 years into this grant. We're tagging humans like wildlife as much as we can. We're trying to gather as much wearable sensor data as we can, apply machine learning and AI approaches to improve performance, predict injury, optimize healthcare. So there's about 17 researchers. Right now we have 32 graduate students. We're working with about 28 different companies worldwide on this at this point in time. It is Canada's first specialized program specifically in wearable technology, and we just keep playing and having fun. So I really think wearable technology is going to reshape healthcare. We need to merge these technologies together. Thank goodness I have armies of undergraduate students who merge the technology together for me. They're the ones who are pulling the weather data off of the internet, putting it in our database, gathering GPS information, pulling in the biomechanical data, and qualitative survey information as well. And wearable health research has just started. There's a lot going on in sports and performance, and that's the low-hanging fruit, and we're trying to go for something that's, I think, a little bit more difficult. So I thank you. I'm fortunate to be funded by Canadian tax dollars. So thank you for you Canadians out there and paying your taxes. And I'm super happy to answer any questions. Yeah.
So any questions for Dr. Ferber? Right there.
The wearables was really interesting. I was curious, do you, it's all about healthcare in your case, but are you, in the wearables group that you're working in the military or the industrial safety applications that wearables can bring?
So we have not yet focused on military applications. I've always thought about more industry applications, especially here in Alberta. You know, we suck money out of the optimize your workers' healthcare, but you also want to optimize how long they spend in a room. What are they doing? What are the outputs from that? So there are pockets of that going on within our group, but more we're focused on the software side of things in terms of developing these algorithms. I'm really not smart enough to deal with the hardware side of things. We're trying to take advantage of existing commercialized hardware in order to build algorithms.
I just heard like some of the concepts of having wearable undershirts that are actually monitoring heart rate, and as a oil industry guy has to go into a hazardous location and you can track his heart rate if it's going up or it's stopped.
Yeah, I used to joke that wearable technology is in our shoes, our socks, on our wrists, in our pockets, and we're wearing wearable technology. And I used to say, and soon it will be woven into our underwear, except a company called me a month ago that's weaving it into the underwear. So it's printed electronics, it's washable, and they had applications more focused on the military, and they were kind of chatting with me about like, what are some, like how else could we use this? And I said, oh, good God, use it in a healthcare setting. Like if you could make it easier to get the heart rate, temperature, to understand how a patient slept, what side of their body they're sleeping on right now, that's critical for a acute care ward, that type of information. So I don't know if they're moving that direction, but that's the type of approach we're taking. Yeah, and already Hexoskin has undergarments, Under Armour has these garments that track your heart rate. And then printed electronics is just a really exciting area where they're just weaving it into the fabric itself.
Thanks for that great talk. I really liked your running pattern graph, and with the red line, just sort of when is a change of behavior significant. Two quick questions. I think the second one you won't be able to answer. The first one, are you looking in the algorithms at not just the position of the pattern, but what the trend is over time, or the velocity? Mm-hmm. So there's a lot of biometrics that, for me, might be different than someone else, but it's not just if I've crossed the line, but what's the direction of the trend? Then you might be able to catch it sooner.
Yeah. So here's 6 people. It's almost like I planted that question. So here's 6 people out of that group of 37 that ended up getting injured. And so this is our original, that's the person I just told you about, and they crossed over. But this person is an elite runner, and they're very much on this side, and their trajectory, their velocity is not quite as much, but they certainly entered a yellow and a red zone, staying within their subgroup. So I'm not saying that you have to cross over to another subgroup altogether, and I think that's what you mean by velocity.
It's the trend over time.
Yeah, but the trend over time, exactly. We need a moving window. We can't just take 5 runs at the beginning of a training season and say, this is how you move, let's monitor you now. We have to move that window over time, because certainly these people ended up, it's very dynamic because the recreational runners, my hyperplane shifts dramatically to the right after about 6 months. They reach a physiological state where they're better trained, and more green people, new runners, start to exhibit patterns like experienced runners. And so my hyperplane moves to the right in all of this. So it looks like I have more experienced runners. So I need a moving window, and we have to reevaluate this depending on weather, depending on change of shoes. That has a little bit of a role for your first 2 runs. Don't go out and buy a bunch of shoes and think it's like your magic bullet. It kind of changes your mechanics for about 2 runs, and then you go back to normal. And it's a very subtle change. So I think does that answer your question? Yeah, sure. It's very dynamic.
And the other one is the axis labels, component 1 and 2.
Yeah, it's a mishmash, right? So for the most part, this is vertical oscillation is principal component 2, and principal component 1 is more velocity, cadence, and vertical ratio, how symmetrical you are. Yeah.
So it's a composite index.
It's a composite index. It's an 8-dimensional problem that I'm trying to portray in 2 dimensions here, just from a explanatory perspective.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for your presentation. I have a question about how unifying all the sensors together can impact your research. I know all the sensors might be collected data and then in the lab, and we just use them together and we see this result. But how merging all this information can impact the process of your research?
Yeah, so I'll give you a specific example. So if we have an individual who is just had hip surgery, a total hip replacement, they are in the hospital for a few days afterwards to be monitored. And they move in a very specific way around the ward. They're walking around in a relatively unobstructed route. They're just walking in a circle for the most part. If we only had their biomechanical data and we didn't have any geospatial data, the first day home, I would think that this patient's hip had fallen apart based on the biomechanical data that I now receive, because they're at home in a very cluttered environment where they have to move around coffee tables and navigate doorways, and it's not as uncluttered as the hospital ward. So I need to know where they are in the world in order to say, well, this is how they're operating now at home. And then even how they operate at their kid's place is very different than how they operate at their house. Even stepping outside of their home, and the weather is critical, because now they're taking really short, choppy steps because it's slippery outside in order to get to the car. And then the data is still being collected when they're in the car. So I've got a great slide that I usually show where I look like a superstar. I took 23,000 steps one day over about a 5-hour period of time, except 3 hours of that I was on a bike. But it just kept recording that it kept recording it as steps. So I would like to know that that should be canceled out. And my favorite way to collect steps is I am the reader at convocation. So I read all the names out of the graduating kinesiology students, and that's when I collect the most steps, by clapping. You see what I'm talking about? It's just a repetitive pattern. So we have to merge these technologies together to help. We don't want to make a decision about the patient and alert them that something's wrong when everything's just fine. They're just in a different environment. They're cluttered. So even just having geospatial information about where are they in the world, that really helps me to make a better decision about their care as a patient. Then I can start layering in other information. The temperature is the #1 predictor of being admitted back to the acute care ward. People's temperature, they get a febrile episode. That means they have some type of infection, and most people don't go to the hospital for 2 days. They'll have a fever for 2 days. Then they report to the hospital, and then they could have a blood infection, which means that they have about a 90% chance of dying in the next 6 days unless they get appropriate treatment. So if I can get their temperature even just a few days before, but I'd like to know that their temperature is in their house and not on the beaches of Maui. Yeah, I hope that answered your question, but that's how we are approaching it.
So this one might be a little bit different, because I'm watching all this and thinking, well, this is really cool stuff. But then, my mind goes back to people like my mom, who is not technological at all.
Yeah.
And who a month after I bought her the Amazon Echo had it unplugged because it was listening to her. Stuff like that. But then, like Ed said, and what I'm seeing you say is, all of this kind of goal of a lot of this is to actually help people.
Yeah.
And she lives 2 hours away from me, lives by herself. Wearable stuff I think would be, amazing for people like that. How do we make this in a way that is useful for the people that, even like, saving on a fixed income, the Nest system, saving an electric bill, or things of that sort. How do we make this kind of stuff, it's easy for people in this room because we think it's all neat and we put as much stuff in our home as we can do. But how do we make that usable for people that it would probably help the most, I guess.
So I'm going to let Ed chime in as well. There's two aspects of it in my mind. One is that we're just trying to do some research to follow people as they age. I really don't think we're going to have much of an impact right now in terms of people who are not technologically savvy or scared of it in the first place. So what I'm doing now, I'm hoping is going to be really useful for 40-year-olds in 10 to 15 years. More importantly, I think insurance is going to drive people to opt in, because you're seeing it already in terms of wearable sensors, well, not wearable, sensors being placed in cars, and you get a discount for driving well. I'll just say well. For not braking hard, for not speeding, your rates go down. And so you're opting into being constantly monitored. I think driverless vehicles, I'm way out of my element now, but I think driverless vehicles are going to become more prominent because our insurance rates are going to drop. Actually, what's going to happen is it's going to be super expensive to drive your own car, because the research is going to show that a driverless car is far more safe than I can be. So my rates are going to skyrocket. That's going to opt me in. And I think that we're going to have our phone, I 100% agree with Ed, we are going to have our biometric medical profile on our phones. And you're going to see it integrated into dating sites. I mean this. This is like super futuristic. We're going to start choosing our partners. No, I mean it. I think we're going to have that information about how we're doing today. I think it's all going to be readily available, and we're going to merge it together. And people are going to carry their healthcare, their health profile in their phone. And they're going to opt in because their insurance rates are going to go down dramatically. And that's what's going to, I guess, force them. 10% savings on your mom's electric bill maybe is not enough to get her to like really engage in it, but if it was more like a 50% drop, plus a drop in health insurance, plus car insurance, I think that's when things start happening for the current generation.
And I guess, the comment that was made earlier about the t-shirt, if you have something, tell her, go stick something on her side, that's probably a little more scary than an actual garment that she might wear anyway or something.
Yeah, like even just choosing I'm so frustrated. I hate dealing with humans sometimes, because I'll do a study and I'll go and purchase 100 Fitbits, for example, because I want to recruit 100 people, and half of those devices will not be worn because they don't like the color. But if I could put a patch, or if I get them to wear a pair of underwear, then I could actually collect reasonable data. And we've been dealing with this for like decades now. I'm doing shoe research back when I was a postdoc. People didn't like gray shoes. I want black. I'm like, what? So I got to go back to New Balance, and I got to get more shoes now. But I'm going to let Ed answer your question.
No, I agree with you. I think it's a classic challenge of technology marketing and trying to identify the compelling use case that will introduce technology. And this is a bizarre story. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with this. Home speakers are a big deal now, whether they're Amazon or Google. But do you know what the number one application of home speakers are? Why most people now buy a home speaker is as a kitchen timer. Yeah?
That's why I bought it for my mom.
There you go.
Because she can't get up and down to go check the clock.
And that's why people are going into their stores and they're buying these very sophisticated devices that give you access to all sorts of information. But the prominent use at this point in time is a kitchen timer.
Okay, thanks very much.
Questions? Thanks very much, Dr. Ferber. Let's have a big round of applause for Dr. Ferber. Okay, next up is Dr. Steve Lang. Dr. Steve Lang is the founder and CTO of SensorThings and my business partner. He's also an associate professor at the University of Calgary and holds the position of IoT Research Chair. Please welcome Dr. Steve Lang.
Okay. Hi, good morning. And then the weather is getting better, so hopefully you'll still look at this direction. So the title is very easy because I just put all the buzzwords together into one. So, and put opportunity in front of it, right? So geospatial plus IoT and AI and opportunity. So hopefully I can live up to the title. Actually, I'm going to share with you some of our thoughts, my thoughts, and how our company SensorUp, the thesis based we built the company upon. So that's me, but most of you know me quite well. And then it's a little bit introduction about SensorUp. Is what we do is we focus on industrial operations. So it's not consumer, it's not about wearable, but we do have wearable components there, integrated different sensor wearables. So industrial operations are dynamic, complex, a lot of moving parts, and spread over large geographical areas. And so, OGC, Open Geospatial, will be more relevant. So typical method to do something about it, detect, communicate, mitigate real-time emergent situations, silo, manual, and too slow. So actually it's very like what Dr. Reed said, right? So they need the green light, yellow light, and red light by industrial operations. But right now today, they do not have those lights, right, for their operations. Everybody want to have those lights. Before my operation can stop, I want to have a yellow light. Before any unnecessary waiting time happen, I want to have a yellow light so I can switch it back to a green light rather than when the unnecessary waiting happens, so that's a red light already, so time is counting, yeah? So that's what we try to do. So how is by connecting equipment and people, basically sensors, and we empower asset-intensive geographic distributed industrial operations to get three things. Number one, real-time visibility, so real-time situational awareness, what's going on, and then, but what's going on is not green, yellow, or red, right? And number two is get your patterns. So what's your typical pattern? And number three is early warnings. So that's what's valuable, the lights. And then people can make judgment. So when you have this green, yellow, and red, and operators, people, decision makers, they can make a judgment, say, okay, what's the cost of making mistake? What's the cost if I keep the red light on? And then you perform an action. Yeah, so that's what we believe where's the value of the IoT and for digital transformation for industrial, but actually it's fit into the previous two talks very well, actually for our personal life as well, right? Anyways, that's some bad joke. But, 2 readings, so that's your assigned reading. So I'm a professor now. Prediction machines and Harvard Business Review, how smart connect products are transforming competition. So the prediction machine is about AI, and the other one is about IoT. And they both books or the article says, if you don't follow what they say, and you're done, we'll be out of business. So, and Google, they announced they are AI first company, right? So it's everything from mobile first into AI first, right? So basically is if you don't do this, we'll be done. Okay, so what is AI? This is from the prediction machine, the book. I really like this idea, and so I want to share with you. So basically, AI offers prediction because when I study, AI means the algorithms. Yeah. So if you take the data mining, machine learning course, association rule mining, sequential mining, blah blah blah, neural network, and so on and so forth, right? So that's AI to me. But I really like this idea, which is so when people ask me about AI, right, I tell them, oh, here are the chapters, right, read it. And however, this really gives me a different idea. AI offers prediction. So we just replace AI with prediction. So, and then right now, so machine learning is not new, right? Deep learning is quite new, but neural network is not new. And so what happens right now in the past 3 years or 4 years is getting much better, okay? And so people are believing in it, right? It's happening, right? But AI research is not new. Number 2 is it's getting affordable. So it's possible for you to run a big AI, yeah, around to make it affordable. So you can replace AI with affordable predictions. So I found this quite interesting. So what does it mean by prediction? Definition. Prediction is taking information you do have to generate information you do not have. So that's a prediction. So easy prediction is like linear regression, right? So I'm running like this, and when I'm going to hit, my speed is this, right? Or my acceleration is there, and velocity is there, so I can hit certain speed, right? And that's a one. But less obvious prediction is, for example, classification. I have a picture, and then I classify that I can identify the tumors and which one are good, which are bad. This was a confidence level. That's prediction as well. Okay, or for us, geospatial, I'm thinking about how to put into geospatial context, right? I have a picture, and I remember one of my very first job is as an intern is digitizing the road network with those photogrammetry, what I can't remember how to call it, right? Huge machines like art, yeah? But right now it's all digital, and digitizing the roads, right? So I have a picture, I said, this is a house, this is a road, right? But today, people are trying to, or in photogrammetry, they try to do, right, in the past 100 years. How can I, from input is the picture, output is the features automatically. And AI is trying to do this, right? In 2D, in 3D, in 4D. So, but AI is prediction, making predictions, and affordable predictions. And I really like this, it's called AI Canvas. So basically just illustrate, okay, what's the value for AI and where's the role for humans? So number one, AI will need data, inputs, right? The more the better. So you have inputs, and then you can start to train the AI, supervised, unsupervised, semi-supervised, and then you have your AI, the model to make predictions. Yeah. So image, okay, here are the tumors, here are the houses, here are the roads, or you have a algorithm, you have all kinds of sensor input, and it tells you the car, self-driving car basically is a prediction. It tries to predict what the human will do. Yeah, it's not the rules engine anymore. So the direction is really about, it's a prediction. So basically is, here are the sensor input and what a human would do. Turn left, turn right, speed, or slow down. Basically 4 actions for when you drive, 4 things. Okay, and then there's something called judgment. I really like about this concept. So what does it mean by judgment? Judgment means that's what we do. Humans make judgment. So we decide to do this or not. AI make predictions, so we make judgments. And judgment means the cost of making mistakes. The cost of making mistakes. So let's say AI give you green, yellow, red, and you make a judgment. You say, I want to keep running, or I'll stop running. Yeah, and then you have actions. Action give you outcome. And outcome comes back to learning. And then your prediction will be better. So I really like using this model to say, okay, so this is really the value for AI, and what we, when in SensorUp, when we try to build our value, build our system, we try to follow this. And we enable people to make better judgment and faster judgment. And actually, when you look at the road of digital transformation or digital technologies, right? So it's really about moving people away from the repetitive work into you can make judgments. So in the past, for example, if you look at accountants, what do? They do an add, like adding this, adding that, adding that. Today, they have Excel. So what do? They make judgment. Is, okay, if interest rate goes up, okay, what's going to happen? But in the past, if they have assumption, what do they need to do? They need to start adding again. Yeah, do all the mathematics, right? How many of you watched the movie Hidden Figure? Yeah, so do you remember those ladies, what's their job title? What's the job title? Computers. That's their job, adding, right? And mathematics, right? Computers. But today, computers help us to replace those jobs, so we make better judgment. So actually, AI is exactly the same thing. AI going to do predictions. It's not simple additions or mathematics, but allow us to make judgment. So we work with oil and gas companies, for example, and then say there are too many people, monitors, so just watching the screen, right? They want to move them into make judgment. They call it workforce of tomorrow, or different terms. So I found this I really like this model, so I'd like to share with you. But where's the IoT here? IoT gives us input. We all know data are always better when they are together. And AI is better with more data, cleaner data, blah, blah, blah. And I think this is very important for us, it's Circle, because actually we, interoperability, we enable the AI so that we can make better predictions and judgment. Because when we do research, right, so we talk about, in my research group, it's like, where's data? Where are data? Where can we find data? Steal the data, rob the data, right? We need data, right? In the Geo AI working group, we'll talk about that as well, right? Where are data, right? So interoperability really removed barrier for data, clean data. But that's a 3D model. Sorry, I didn't have time to find a better icon. But adding sensor data plus 3D model, the world basically, and we can make better predictions. So actually, I learned that from CDB, from CAE actually, is that when we have replicate the world physically, and then we have the sensor data, we can predict future. So I was watching on I have a 4-year-old and 1-year-old, right? So making predictions, right? After I have this the prediction idea, I was like, okay, what predictions I'm making every day, right? Actually, we're making predictions all the time. When I have my kid running around in the kitchen, so sometimes they just, I couldn't see them, right? But within 4 or 5 seconds, I know I don't need to look for them because they won't make big damage. That's my prediction, right? But I kind of know there is a knife in 60 seconds, 6 seconds, and in the best shortest path to that knife. And I might need to bring him to the hospital. Yeah? So basically, I'm making that implicitly, the prediction implicitly. So based on what? Based on my sensory inputs and based the configuration of my kitchen. So self-driving car is similar, based on sensory input, and people are talking about high-def maps, right? And then based on the 3D environment, and then we can make better predictions. So I found this, again, this is what I'm thinking about, where we fit in all these. So I heard the other concept I really like is the prediction. So we have predictions here, right? And right now we know, like image with deep learning stuff, right? You see, oh wow, they can really differentiate as a cat or a dog, right? But by the way, we have a demo my students set up over there, so you can go there and walk in front of the screen and it'll tell you are a person or not. Okay, so if you're not a person, I don't know, maybe, I don't know. That's a prediction we make, right? And we have a cup, and go there, hold the cup, and it'll tell you it's a cup, right? That's a prediction. So let's crank it up, right? Because right now it's so excited because this is not new, right? To have a box and say you're a person is not new. But right now it's do it much cheaper and faster and more accurate, right? So when you crank up that AI prediction level, what's gonna happen? So I found some quite revealing. Asians try to stay away from L and R. Okay, so how many of you shop on Amazon? Or your spouse shop on Amazon? And come home, it's like, whoa, 3 more boxes. That one looks expensive. It's very small. Okay, big sometimes it's cheap. So what do? You do shop, and when you shop, they make recommendation. Yeah. So basically, is I don't know how accurate apply to you. What's accuracy? And but it's like, okay, yeah, I just bought this. I bought a truck, so I recommend this cover and recommend this rack, right? Okay, I choose one. Yeah. So maybe 5%, 10% for accuracy. Yeah. And then you order, you ship to you, and then you receive, right? And then that's your shopping process. But what if you crank it up? The accuracy is like, let's say 60%. That means when they recommend you stuff, and you'll buy 6 out of them, 10. It will change how they do business, how they innovate. It will change into this. If they know when they recommend you 10 things, you'll buy 6. Can Amazon just ship to you? You change your shopping behavior from ship, receive, and shop. And then if you keep 6 things and you want to return 4 things, so what does that mean? That means they block their competitors. Because in the past, you buy 2 things from them, you buy 2 things, other things from, I don't know, Alibaba or something, right? But they just ship it to you and you buy them. And so they kind of eliminate their competitors. And they change the behavior. And then when they know they need to return the 4 things, right? What's going to do? They can re-optimize how they collect the returns and become more efficient. And this is called dynamic shift. So this is what AI can do, which is disrupt the technology or disrupt the business, how you do business, totally. But if you crank this up to a certain level, it doesn't have to be 100% accuracy. And you can totally change the way you compete. So I found actually those 2 books I recommend, they both say the same thing, is if it will change the way you compete and totally change it. And this is one way, which is a concept, is it will totally change how we shop and totally change how they compete, right? Eliminate all their competitors because they're getting more and more accurate and more efficient. I found it for me, it's quite interesting. And of course, Amazon has been doing this, right? So that's patent about this, anticipatory shipping, and they're doing some pilots around the world. So actually, it made me think about, actually for this group, it's like, in our industry or the customers we serve, if we crank up this AI and we said we can connect all the sensor information they have, right? And what kind of dynamic shift we can enable them to have, or we can change. So we can totally make them very competitive, so we can have recurring revenue, so on and so forth, right? Save the world. So for me, that's a very big question I'm asking today. I don't have answer in example, yeah? But I'm just thinking about in our industry, let's crank up these things because it's gonna happen. We know that, right? GPU is so powerful right now. And then how can we disrupt? And I think we play a critical role here. Geospatial, context, Geo-AI sensors, critical role. So that's what we build our company upon, the thesis. So how AI and IoT transform competition, right? So IoT give you what? And IoT and geospatial, what does it give you? Visibility, know what's going on, where things are and what conditions they are in. Yeah, dashboard, blue dots. And after you have data in real time, it gives you performance, so pattern. So when you have pattern, of course, with the real-time data to clean, irrigation, enrichment, right? Because we all know these data are very, very dirty and ugly, yeah? And then you have pattern. When you have pattern, historical data, and then you can start training it, make some basic predictions. Then you can further optimize it. So your action is, let me do this, or optimize it. And then the next step is, well, make more predictions and present to human operators, and then they can make judgment. So I'm going to do this. So I'll automate it, right? Decide to automate what is a human judgment as well. Okay, and then become automation, and automation give you outcome. And outcome, of course, you want to incorporate back to your training data set and just getting better and better. That's what we think was disruption or digital transformation should do. So Melchizedek's law, network effect. So again, what we can play here in OGC is how to interconnect different data sources, be 3D models, vector tiles, features, OGC API features, and then OGC API coverage and sensors, yeah? So the value will increase. And then, so competition shift when you have, basically this tells you that the more you put together, it'll be better. Okay, when you are able to put different data all together, and then you can make better predictions or decisions, yeah. And then, especially if they are from different silos, yeah. But then we know today's silos severe the value of IoT, and then also we know context is very important for AI. Because AI without context is not very useful. So especially when we are aggregating data from different systems, without context, we cannot put them all together. They are not one. They are still siloed. Yeah. So you can have, okay, let me put a number together. No, it doesn't work like that. And who are the experts in context? It's us. Yeah. Geospatial, OGC. Most of our standards have, has semantics or ontology built in. So annotation for AI is very important. Actually, if the data are doing right, we have annotation already, right? It's in a model, in ontology. Spatial is special. So again, I'm just thinking about in the Geo AI working group, I'm thinking about, okay, what's special in what we do? I don't have answer. I think we're gonna have some discussions in OGC or later today is, okay, we know it's special, but why, how, what's the next step, right? In my opinion, I think trajectory is important. I think Dr. Referber's presentation about activities like wearable data, that's very interesting, and that's very geospatial. And then, for example, like fatigue of workers, right? I think that's a lot of companies that really want to know that. Are my workers, tired, right? Because when you feel tired, bad things will happen, right? And when we are programming, I'm tired. I hit a coffee cup. That's okay. But if you have a big hammer, you're tired, it's not a very good idea. Okay, so, but what are those? So are we still special? Or how can we find the special in the AI world? And so it can be more relevant. So conclusion, IoT give you data. So I argued actually connectivity is very important. The transport protocol is very important. But however, at the end of the day, it's about data. And data need context. So data is the new oil. So in Alberta, it's very relevant. We try to get more data. Okay. Number two, AI. AI is affordable predictions. So I just want to share this with you. So replace AI with affordable predictions and give you a different lens to look at the things. And standards play a critical role in AI and IoT. So how can the community here, we have some discussion, initial discussions, right? How can we make OGC SensorThings more relevant, right? And I think that'll be our job to the society, actually. And but final one, what dynamic shifts will happen? Because it will happen, right? In the future, you will shop every day. A scary future, right? You open the door, whoa, what am I going to buy, right? This is gonna happen. But what can be, that will be enabled by GeoAI and IoT. So we can lead the way to make that happen. I think that's a very big question, and then it will be nice to have some discussions. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Steve. Any questions for Steve?
It's either talk so good or so bad. So
lunchtime, buddy.
Anyone?
I have a general question. Just are the presentations going to be posted anywhere? I mean,
and yeah. So yeah,
okay.
yeah. For those who agree to share, it will be shared on the website. Yeah.
Gordon, question.
This is the second, maybe the third presentation this morning. You talked about the more stuff to put on the network, the better it is. If it goes up with cube or square it is. How is that going to really do congestion in the network?
I don't know. That's back to the internet, right? So actually, when the value is there, people will find a way to accommodate them. Like how our internet grows, right? So you look at the network technology, right? There's so much value you can create from data, and we just keep adding things, right? 5G right now, right? And 6G in the future. It will happen. Yeah, sorry, it just really is from a guessing perspective and whole history. Yeah. If not, yes.
Yeah, thanks. Great presentation. So the sort of follow-on question to the previous one. So the number of, the more sensors we have, the bigger the value. Also for AI, the more inputs you have, the more variables you have to work with. And this is probably an open-ended answer to this, but what's sort of your gut feel of the top 2 or 3 things that make it the most difficult right now to integrate across multiple sensors? And if you want to take a spatial angle as well, fine. But what are some of the biggest barriers? Obviously, most of these systems have REST APIs on top of them, and you're working with JSON posts and whatnot. So what do you think if you could prioritize or triage the top 2 or 3 barriers that make it difficult to integrate across them?
So I have a fluffy answer. Actually, I don't think technical is a problem. There are ways to do it. It's really about the mindset and the policies. So number one is if the data, if the company, organization, they have a data-driven mindset or AI-first mindset, it'll be easier because they know they do put together. But for example, in some traditional industry, they hug their systems. They don't want it to be out. And that's where the problem comes, right? So internal politics, internal mindset, for example, in oil and gas, they hug their SCADA system. It's like, it's my precious, don't touch it, right? And that's the biggest problem we have. So that's a struggle. And then again, if we have ways, a lot of companies try to deal with this, right? The recent glorious failure is called Critics, right, from GE. But if we can make technology like how to integrate them easier and more plug and play, of course it's gonna come to help. But I do think it's not a technological problem. Typically, we found it's, initial connection is a couple hours to debug, everything, accept the pull request, per about a week max, after we have all the technical information. Yeah.
A lot of the proprietary systems are just kind of black boxes and you just can't get at the data, or it's harder to.
But they have a lot of ways to download it, for example, put in their data lake, right? It's an internal process, right? So from drive, from here, you can even ship the hard drive if you want. Yeah, but if they don't want to do it, right?
So it's the more the mindset.
I think so. But back to the value you can create, because if you can create a dynamic shift, if you can really demonstrate you create a value, and it will tend to happen. So I think that's the holy grail, right? So what's the real value you can create for them? I think it's also for us interoperability, right? Interoperability create a lot of value, but also it's like more like a fundamental layer. You need to really go into this, how much money I can save you, this and that, and how to find that. It's the gold mine, right? Yeah. If not,
so we won't stand between you and lunch anymore. So time for lunch. We'll pick back up at 1 o'clock with SensorThings successes around the world. Let's have one last round of applause for Steve and all of our speakers.